night, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast, the last reading chapter of the Richest Man of Babylon. Thank you so much for those of you who stuck through every single episode. I hope you've learned something from this amazing book. Our next book, we're starting tomorrow, no breaks. We're reading one chapter a day, every single day. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing Happy Money by Ken Honda, an absolute classic, an absolute must read. And today we are in episode 23, and the chapter is chapter 11 of the Richest Man of Babylon. And yesterday, when we were looking at chapter 10, if you will recall, we looked at a couple of very important things. And I just want to quickly point out some of the things that, stood out for me, generally speaking, because I can tell you now, because I have read this book a couple of times before. Chapter 11, which is the last chapter of the book, just does a good job of explaining a lot about the city and its historics and how the source of the inspiration behind it, and it's absolutely important. But chapter 10, yesterday's chapter really emphasized the power of making consistent work, consistency, working hard consistently, becoming your best friend. And that was really a massive take home for me, that you must continuously keep pushing. And there was a story about how this very rich man came about his riches and how he started off as a slave. But for the most part, I think the book has done a phenomenal job in just grounding us, right, in a lot of powerful financial principles, right? So chapter 11, the title is A Historical Sketch of Babylon, and it's not that long. And like all things in life, we must see them through. We must finish what we start. You pick up a book to read it, you finish it, right? You never know what you're going to pick up until you do, right? So as I go, in the pages of history, there leaves no city more glamorous than Babylon. Its very name conjures visions of wealth and splendor. Its treasures and of gold and jewels are fabulous. One naturally pictures such a wealthy city as located in a suitable setting of tropical luxury, surrounded by rich natural resources of forests and mines. Such was not the case. It was located beside the Euphrates River in a flat, arid valley. It had no forests, no mines, not even stone for building. It was not even located upon a natural trade route. The rainfall was insufficient to raise crops. Babylon is an outstanding example of man's ability to achieve great objectives using whatever means are at his disposal. All of the resources supporting this large city were men developed. All of his riches were man-made. Babylon possessed two natural resources, a fertile soil and water in the river, with one of the greatest engineering accomplishments of this or any other day. Babylonian engineers diverted the waters from the river by means of dams and immersed irrigation canals. Far out across that arid valley went these canals to pour the life-giving water over the fertile soil. This ranks among the first engineering feats known to its history. So, the last chapter is just like, it's not like a complete fable, right? Babylon did actually exist. So it's quite interesting to know. Right now, this ranks amongst the first engineering feats known to history. Such abundant crops as were the reward of this irrigation system the world had never seen before. Fortunately, during its long existence, Babylon was ruled by successive lines of kings to whom conquest and plunder were but incidental. While it engaged in many wars, most of these were local or defensive against ambitious conquerors from other countries who converted the fabulous treasures of Babylon. The outstanding rulers of Babylon, living in history because of their wisdom, enterprise, and justice, Babylon produced no struggling monarchs who sought to conquer the known world, that all nations must pay homage to their egotism. As a city, Babylon exists when those energizing human forces that built and maintained the city for thousands of years were withdrawn. It soon became a deserted ruin. The site of the city is in Asia, about 600 miles east of the Suez Canal, just north of the Perusian Gulf. I thought I was going to take my dad there once for his 60th birthday, and I haven't. And my dad just turned 60, so maybe I should really, really focus on getting that done in the next 2 years or so. But I know he would love to go there. The latitude is about 30 degrees above the equator, practically the same as that of Yuma or in Arizona. It possessed a climate similar to that of this American city, hot and dry. Today, this valley of the Euphrates, once a populous irrigated farming district, is again a wind-swept arid waste. Scant grass, desert shrubs strive for existence against the withdrawn sands. Gone are the fertile fields, the mammoth cities, and long caravans of rich merchandise. Nomadic bands of Arabs securing a scant living by trading small herds are the only inhabitants. Such it has been since about the beginning of the Christian era. Dotting this valley are earthen hills. For centuries, they were considered by travelers to be nothing else. The attention of archaeologists were finally attracted to them because of the broken pieces of pottery and brick washed down by the occasional rainstorms. Expeditions financed by the European and American museums were sent here to excavate and see what could be found. Picks and shovels soon proved these hills to be ancient cities, city graves they might well be called. Babylon was one of these. Over it, for something like 20 centuries, the winds had scattered the desert dust, built originally of brick, all exposed walls and disintegrated and gone back to earth once more. Such is Babylon, the city, wealthiest city today, a heap of dirt for long abandoned that no living person even knew its name until it was discovered by carefully removing the refuse of centuries from the streets and fallen wreckage of its noble temples and palaces. Many scientists consider the civilization of Babylon and other cities in this valley to be the oldest of which is a definite record. Positive dates have proved reaching back to 8,000 years. An interesting fact in this connection is the means used to determine these dates. Uncovered in the ruins of Babylon were descriptions of an eclipse of the sun. Modern astronomers readily computed the time when such an eclipse visible in Babylon occurred and thus established a known relationship between their calendar and our own. In this way, we've proved that 8,000 years ago, the Sumerites who inhabited Babylon were living in walled cities. One can only conjecture for how many centuries previous such cities had existed. The inhabitants were not mere barbarians living within protecting walls. They were an educated and enlightened people. So far as written history goes, they were the first engineers, first astronomers, first mathematicians, first financiers, and the first people to have a written language. Mention has already been made of the irrigation systems that transformed the arid valley into an agricultural paradise. The remains of these canals can still be traced, although they are mostly filled with accumulated sand. Some of them were such of size that when empty of water, dozen horses could be ridden abreast along their bottoms. In the size they compare favorably with the largest canals in Colorado and Utah. In addition to irrigation, the Valley Lands Babylon engineers completed completed another project of similar magnitude. By means of an elaborate drainage system, they reclaimed an immense area of swampland at the mouths of the Euphrates, Tigris rivers, and put this under cultivation. The Greek traveler and historian visited Babylon while it was in its prime and has given us the only known description by an outsider. Okay? Now, his writings give graphic description of the city and of some of the unusual customs of his people. He mentions the remarkable fertility of the soil and the bountiful harvest of wheat and barley which they produce. The glory of Babylon has faded upon its wisdom and has been preserved for us. For this we are indebted in the form of records. In that distant day, the use of paper had not been invented. Instead, they laboriously engraved their writing upon tablets of moist clay. When completed, these were baked and became hard tile. In size, they were about 6 or 8 inches and an inch in thickness. These clay tablets, as they are commonly called, were used much as we use modern forms of writing. Upon them were engraved legends, poetry, history, transcriptions of royal decrees, the laws of the land, titles of property, promissory notes, and even letters which were dispatched by messengers to distant cities. From these clay tablets, where we are permitted an insight into the intimate personal affairs of people. For example, one tablet, evidently from the records of a country keeper, relates that upon the given date, a certain named customer brought in a cow and exchanged it for 7 sacks of wheat, 3 being delivered at the time, and the other 4 await the customer's pleasure. Safely buried in the wrecked cities, archaeologists have recovered entire libraries of these tablets. So basically, Babylon's a real city, these teachings are real, these people are real. It's just written in a nice story, but it's all real. All right, one understanding wonders of Babylon was the immense walls surrounding the city. The ancient ranked them with great pyramids of Egypt as belonging to the 7 wonders of the world. Queen Semiramis is credited with having erected the first walls during the early history of the city. Modern excavators have been unable to find any trace of the original walls, nor is their exact height known. From the mention made by early writers, it is estimated they were about 50 to 60 feet high, faced with outside with a burnt brick and further protected by a deep moat of water. The later and famous walls were started by about 600 years before the time of Christ by King Nabolsia. Upon such a gigantic scale did the plan the real building, he did not live to see the work finished. This was left to his son Nebuchadnezzar, whose name is familiar in biblical history. The height of these length in these later walls stagger belief. They are reported upon reliable authority to have been 160 feet high, equivalent of the height of a modern 15-story office building. The total length is estimated between 9 and 11 miles, so wide was the top that a 6-horse chariot could be driven around them. Of this tremendous structure, little now remains except proportions of the foundations and the moat. In addition to the ravages of the elements, the Arabs completed the destruction by quarrying the brick for building purposes elsewhere. Against the walls of Babylon marched in the victorious armies of almost every conqueror of the age of war's conquest. A host of kings laid siege to Babylon, but always in vain. Invading armies of the day were not to be considered lightly. Historians speak of such units as 10,000 horsemen, 25,000 chariots, 1,200 regiments of foot soldiers with 1,000 men to the regiment. Often 2 or 3 years of preparation will be required to assemble war materials and depots of food along the proposed line of march. The city of Babylon was organized much like a modern city. There were streets and shops. Peddlers offered their wares through residential districts. Priests officiated in magnificent temples. Within the city was an inner enclosure of royal palaces. The walls about this were said to have been higher than those about the city. The Babylonians were skilled in the arts. These included sculpture, painting, weaving, gold gold working, and the manufacture of metal, weapons, and agricultural elements. Their jewelers created most artistic jewelry. Many samples have been recovered from the engraves of its wealthy citizens and now are in exhibition in the leading museums of the world. At a very early period when the rest of the world was still hacking at trees, the stone-headed axes, or hunting and fighting with flint-pointed spears and arrows, the Babylonians were using axes, spears, and arrows with metal heads. So they were quite an advanced society. The Babylonians were clever financiers and traders. So far as we know, they were the original investors of money as means of exchange. First used money as a means of exchange of promissory notes and written titles to property. Babylon was never entered by hostile enemies until about 540 years before the birth of Christ. Even then, the walls were not captured. The story of the fall of Babylon is most unusual. Cyrus, one of the great conquerors of the period, intended to attack the city and hoped to take its impregnable walls. Advisors of Nabonidus, the king of Babylon, persuaded him to go forth to meet Cyrus and give him battle without waiting for the city to be besieged. In the succeeding, and it's the last page. In the succeeding defeat of the Babylon army, it fled away from the city. Cyrus thereupon entered the open gates and took possession without resistance. So wait, how the hell did they do this? So I'll just read that again. In the succeeding defeat to the Babylonian army, it fled away from the city. So the army actually ran away. Cyrus thereupon entered the gates and took possession without resistance. Thereafter, the power and the prestige of the city gradually waned until, in the course of a few years, it was eventually abandoned, deserted, left for the winds and storms to level once again to that desert earth for which its grandeur had originally been built. Babylon had fallen never to rise again, but to it civilization owes much. The yearns of time have crumbled to dust the proud walls of its temples, but the wisdom of Babylon endures. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of our second book. I honestly thank you for making this crazy idea possible. I do this for you. I believe in the power of one, whether it's one person streaming, 10 people, 30 people. And I see you guys, listeners from Turkey, UK, America, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Finland. I appreciate all of you. I thank you so much. At some point in time, we might have to open up a platform where you guys can actually make suggestions of the type of books you'd like to hear in the podcast. Right now, I'm very much fixated on getting us thinking about money, wealth creation, and reminding us of how interlooped these great books are in repeating these things, right? So this has been an incredible book. One of the best parables, just a classic 194 pager, George Clarkson, The Richest Man in Babylon. And I encourage you to get a copy for yourself. I encourage you to pass this book down, in the generations of your family. But I'll see you tomorrow, more importantly, as we start our second book. Our next book is going to be, I don't have it close by with me here, but we'll be looking at Ken Honda's book on happy money, the Japanese art of creating wealth. And there are going to be a lot of valuable, crazy lessons that I don't think a lot of people think about when it comes to money. 365, shake my hand and have a good night or good day, wherever you are, whenever you are. Cheers, everybody. Goodbye.